Greetings, greetings, and thank you. I long and often love the opportunity to speak with people, particularly those who are sensitive to our cause. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to stand before you today. As I share with you today, I am mindful of the continuing challenge of convincing some that no man should be the property of another, and no man should have control of another man's destiny. I want to let you know that I was born not Frederick Douglass, mind you, but Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, 4 names. Born in 1818 in Tuckahoe County, Talbot County, on the eastern shore of Maryland. I am the 4th of 6 children. My oldest brother is Perry. My sisters Sarah and Eliza. My youngest Kitty and Ariana. My mother's name was Harriet. I did not see her often. I was raised by my grandmother, a strong black woman named Betsy Bailey. Many would say that the strength that I have and have shown is attributed mostly to her. I can remember as a young boy us walking down gravel roads many miles. There was no cart, no chariot, no wagon to ever take us anywhere. And I remember my grandmother, as I grew weary walking, she would swoop me up in her arms and hold me and walk with me, seemingly mile after mile. Ever a strong presence in my life. The better part of my early years were carefree, I would say. Yes, I was a slave, but I knew not the peculiar institution. I would bandy about the plantation, frolicking, picking berries. I would enjoy very much my life as a young boy. And sure, I heard the inhumanity oftentimes, but I did not yet understand what was going on until about age 8. I was to become the companion of a young boy. I was taken to the home of Hugh and Sophia Auld, where I would become the companion of their son, Thomas. And only then did I experience what it meant to be subject. For Thomas was a mischievous sort. And it was in his trouble and his mischievousness that I would bear the brunt. I could hear Mr. Auld oftentimes say to me, "Frederick, why has Thomas come to this?" Like Thomas had no will and no ideas of his own. Who am I to control him, I thought. But I would bear the punishment on many occasions for Thomas's mischievousness. And boy, was he mischievous. One of the things I would imagine as I lived with the Auld family, as Mrs. Sophia would sit in their parlor and read from the vast library that they held, books to Thomas. I didn't understand what she was saying, but I could see the joy on his face as she would read to him. And I would think, oh, for the joy of that experience as the reader and the receiver of such information. Coyly one day I asked Miss Sophia myself, "Would you teach me to read?" And surprisingly, she agreed. And then our secret sessions began. Why secret? I knew not. On one particular day, as we were in our session, our reading session, in burst Mr. Thomas. Totally be enraged at his mother. Why are you teaching him to read? Don't you understand what you're doing? I'm aghast. What does he mean? You know that teaching him to read would bring the kind of knowledge that would desire his freedom? And then I understood. He wanted what so many wanted of slaves, that they be ignorant, that they know not of themselves and their constitution. Because in those pages, Mr. Thomas saw something I had not seen. Mr. Thomas saw hope. For indeed, as we would learn of anything that would bring us knowledge, my friends, and this is something you might use in your time, knowledge is power. What an apropos cliche. Knowledge is power. And that's the last thing the slave owner wanted any slave to experience, was power of any kind. So Miss Sophia discontinued our reading sessions. But that did not stop the reading for me. For Mr. Thomas's rage only fueled the fire in me to read all the more. And so upon acquiring one of the books from the library, I secretly hid it in my room. And again, I would teach myself to read and to write. You would call me in your time a self-made man. It was after that time, around 1833, where I'd become about 15 years old. And now it was time for this scrapping young black buck to earn his keep in the field. And I was hired out from plantation to farmer, and I came across one man, Mr. Covey. Not the nicest man you'd ever want to know. Covey had a penchant for brutality. And I found myself at the end of that brutality on numerous occasions. But one day, I had had enough. And I made a challenge to Mr. Covey's authority that day. And all I can tell you after the completion of this altercation is that Mr. Covey never laid a hand on me again. It was at this time the prospect for freedom began to well up in me. The longing for it. And I must say that I made several attempts to escape. Alas, they were not successful. I was caught, I was jailed, and then ultimately returned to the home of Hugh and Sophia Auld. Around 1838, I decided once again to seek out my own freedom and borrowed some papers from a sailor and found my way to New York from Maryland. I had been successful, yet the risk was great. I had made it to New York, and I decided then to change my name from Bailey to Johnson. And as Frederick Johnson, I would meet the most beautiful thing that had ever crossed this atmosphere. I would see a woman by the name of Anna Murray, a slave herself. We would fall in love, and we would desire to be married. But I thought, never as slaves would we be married. We would need to be free. And so Anna and I were able to escape to Massachusetts, where we would stay with Nathan and his wife, Johnson, the Johnson family. And once again, freedom was on our minds. I changed my name again from Johnson to the name I have now, Douglas. After reading a poem by Sir Walter Scott, The Lady of the Lake. Have you read it? It was then in 1839 when we had our first child, Rosetta. A beautiful, beautiful child. And about this time as well, I began to hear that freedom was afoot, but not among my black brethren. There was a white man by the name of William Lord Garrison who had been writing a paper called The Liberator. And Mr. Garrison was beginning to bring together a coalition of people, white people, mind you, that would dare seek emancipation, liberation for my kind. I was amazed. And with every opportunity to read this paper, with every opportunity to hear Mr. Garrison's words, I thought, oh, to be close to someone like this. Mr. Garrison was a revolutionary, I thought. Who would dare, in the midst of this ill, speak of emancipation, abolition for slaves? Unthinkable. I was able to acquire my license as a preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. I had a pension, a gift for gab, if you will. I love to talk. But oftentimes the issue is not that you can talk, but what you talk about. Freedom. Freedom. And so I began to think, oh, if I could draw close to Mr. Garrison. Oh, if there was the opportunity. And then it presented itself. I would meet him. I would hear him. And speak to him in the most amazing time. I thought, oh, what a prophet. Oh, what a man. And as he began to bring together all of those people, I thought, what a risk they would take. Anna and I continued to have children, to continue to grow our family. In 1842, we had our son Frederick, and in 1844, our son Charles. It was about this time that I was asked to write my first autobiography, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. Have you read it? You should. Our relationship, Mr. Garrison and I, only grew stronger. He said to me, Frederick, I like how you speak. I like the way you speak. How, not knowing how to read and write, could you have acquired such a large vocabulary? I could only say to him, Mr. Garrison, this is a gift from God. He asked me to travel with him to Europe, and we went to Great Britain, and we went to Ireland, speaking about abolition, speaking about freedom. And there, we were able to get those friends to raise $711.66 to buy my freedom. Imagine it. $711.66 is the price you are worth. Upon returning to New York and Rochester particularly, I began to think that it's now time for me to be the pioneer. Now a free man, I now have the opportunity to share my ideas and my thoughts about freedom. And so we bought a printing press with the money from our European friends. And I began to write a weekly paper called The North Star, after the very star that would lead many to freedom. Our home and our press became a place, a stopping point for great friends of mine like Harriet Tubman, who came through on her way through the Underground Railroad. You know of this? I trust you do. these ideals in this paper. I love the fact that my children could be a part of this work, this freedom work, getting this movement, this message to those who would hear. For no man should control another man this way. It was around 1847 that I had an interesting encounter. A thin, skinny man by the name of John Brown. His eyes afire. Speaking the same language as William Lloyd Garrison, yet with a twist. Oftentimes when John and I would meet, John would bring his gun. And I would think, John, why the gun? And he would say to me, with all the enthusiasm, with all the passion that a person could exude, Frederick, this is the way we will win. For power never gives of itself. It must be taken by force. And I'm willing to die for this cause, he would say to me. And let me say to you, my friends, I believed him. But I would say that John was often disappointed with me, because I thought that freedom should take another route, and that violence was indeed not the answer. Better yet, what good would it be for me to fight all this time and not be able to actually see the freedom for which I fought? I thought and said to John on many occasions, John, I'd rather live for freedom than die for it. And so he went his way. And he and his sons and his cohorts would rally at Harper's Ferry and would put on the greatest display of fighting and abolition that you could possibly imagine. Yet, John would survive this failed effort. And he would ultimately pay with his life. I learned a great lesson from John Brown. A lesson I need share with you today. John was one of the few men who understood the difference between commitment and conviction. You say, Mr. Douglas, what do you mean? Well, I'm here to tell you, friends, today that it's likely that there are things that you've started that you have yet to finish. Is that true? Because most people are good starters, but they're bad finishers. And when we start these things, we sense our commitment to them. We sense our vow, our pledge. We're serious when we start, aren't we? But the question, my friends, is why don't these things come to completion? Obstacles, adversity, detours, barriers come in the way. And what John convinced me of is that sometimes commitment is not enough. It's not enough to pledge yourself to something. The question is, where is the wherewithal to get to the end? It's in conviction. So I ask you today, what do you believe in? What do you believe so strongly in that there indeed is a price that you would pay? Is there such a thing? Is there such a thing? That you would give your very self for it? And there were times when I thought about John's sacrifice that a tear would come to my eye. Why wasn't I willing to pay that price? Commitment